us today for our November webinar on loss control and how to make it work for you. And what that means is we'll be discussing what exactly loss control is, some strategies for using it at your organization, and what kind of results you might see after implementing an effective loss control program, such as increase in safety, reduction in claims. So we'll talk about all that today. We're joined today by our presenter, CSD Pool's own risk control consultant, Kyle Brown. Before his arrival at the pool, Kyle spent the last 5 years as a corporate safety and compliance coordinator, creating and implementing programs to reduce injuries and hazards in the workplace. He's well-versed in conducting facility inspections, developing company safety trainings, and regulatory compliance. And I'm sure with our districts on the call today, he's probably visited you a couple of times and talked a little bit about this during those visits and inspections. So today, a couple of housekeeping items real quick to get through. We are recording today's session, so if you have any audio issues, technical difficulties, or need to step away, everybody's going to get a copy of this recording to refer back to. We'll send it out via email. We also added the slides in the files box for download, so if you want to refer back to these slides or share them within your organization, you could download those right now above the chat box. And if you have questions throughout today's session, go ahead and just type them in as we go through. We have a pretty lean presentation today, so definitely want to make this participatory if anybody wants to drill down on anything that Kyle's talking about. We'll also pause at the end for questions again as well. So I think that will cover it. I'm going to turn things over to Kyle, and he can take it away to start our loss control discussion today. Kyle, thanks for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, Alex, and thank you all for joining today. As Alex mentioned, today we're going to be talking about loss control and how we can utilize loss control to help you as the leadership of your districts manage your fiduciary responsibilities. And as the loss control consultant with the CSD Pool, loss control is one of these things that I do mostly with your districts. And if you think about it to a certain extent, I know a lot of names on here are very familiar, and if not, I hope to meet you someday, but really everything that I go out and help you guys do is boiled down to loss control. But some things we're going to be talking about today and really hammering down to is you can do loss control all the time. Loss control also applies more to what we just give it credit for. And two, I really just want to challenge you and kind of encourage you all to, one, understand how loss control can help you protect your district and protect your district's assets. And second is to train your mind to start thinking outside the box. Whenever you're going throughout your facility, when you're going to a different department, or even when you're visiting another district, think, how can this apply to loss control? What are my exposures here? And how can I really work on controlling those exposures? So with that said, we are going to dive right in to what we hope to cover today. So, of course, we're going to start off with a very broad definition of loss control. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you guys this entire time by talking just straight definitions, but I do find this definition to be very powerful. And at a basic, it is, as a district, you're exposed to many risks. Each of these risks can lead to loss. And as a district, if you're exposed to too many losses, it's going to impede upon your fiduciary responsibility. And what your fiduciary responsibility is, as leadership, safety professionals, whatever your role might be in the district, you have that responsibility to the public, to your voters, to the board, to provide them a service, to use the district in a way that is going to increase its longevity, that's not going to lead to issues down the road, that's going to allow you to, continually and properly perform that service that you promised the public that you will be doing. Next, we're going to talk about what is covered by loss control. I get kind of excited whenever I talk about this one because I think this is where we can really get some people to open up your horizon to what loss control is. And I'm not going to spoil that. We'll talk about that in a couple slides, but I think that that's going to be a big eye-opener for everyone. Next, why is loss control important? I really started off the conversation with that, but it's worth saying multiple times. Loss control is important because we want to protect our district, we want to protect our assets. And by noting the risk that our district is exposed to and catching those risk factors earlier before they become losses, that's how we protect our district in a number of different ways. And lastly, or second to last, we have loss control strategies and solutions. So I'm going to identify how you can, I'm going to show you guys how to identify some of the potential losses that your district might be exposed to. And then once you've identified them, how do we prioritize them? Which ones are the biggest threats to our districts? And how do we, once we've hammered down the fact that we have our loss, we know that it's a problem, how do we come up with solutions to solve that loss, to mitigate that loss? So it might still be there, but what we really want to do is maybe mitigate it so it's not going to have a severe of an impact or less of a likelihood of happening. And lastly, we're going to talk about some of the specific things that the CSD pool offers in our loss control briefcase to help you guys manage your risk, to help you manage your losses. So, moving right along, what is loss control? I am going to read these definitions because I find them to be very important, but I'm not going to read them word for word. What loss control really is it's a subdivision of risk management, in my opinion. And what that means is to help you reduce the severity and the likelihood of a loss. It typically involves finding the sources of risk that your district is exposed to and creating a plan of actions or policies and procedures to help you as your district mitigate those risks. And it typically, it typically involves you identifying the risk and acting upon it. To its simplicity, those two words at the bottom of the screen should be your takeaway from the definition of loss control. Identify where your loss exposures are coming from and act to address those exposures. And I want to take that a little bit further and give you guys a couple examples. So, slips, trips, and falls. I always like to use slips, trips, and falls examples. If you guys listen to many of my webinars, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but I bring it up because slips, trips, and falls are pretty universal based on exposure. Everybody's exposed to them. So if you're wanting to implement loss control for slips, trips, and falls, you would have to say, well, where are my exposures for slips, trips, and falls? Is it an icy walkway in the wintertime? Is it a improperly created sidewalk that you guys just have to live with because it's not in the budget to correct, but it's also a big trip hazard to the public? And once you've identified all of those areas where you have the slip, trip, and fall hazard in your district, then you have to act upon them. First, you identify which one is the most severe hazard, which one has the greatest likelihood of causing damage, and you make a plan. How do we address this? Do we use ice melt? Do we find the source of where our ice is coming from and stop it there? So a lot of those things are something that will be on a very case-by-case basis. Another example of loss control, this one is a little more not traditional of what you would think, but again, that's part of our goal today, is to get you guys to think outside the box for the different types of losses that your district is exposed to. So let's say the rising cost of equipment. That's another thing that I feel is very universal between all districts that I work with, to where it doesn't matter if you're a library district, if you're a park and rec district, if you're a cemetery district, everybody seems to be exposed to the rising cost of equipment, rising cost of materials and assets, whether that be employee salaries, whether that be lawnmowers you're using, pumps, vehicles. And an example of loss control in this idea would be, I know that I need to replace X item in the next 5 years. You could go through and you could spend the next 4 years pretending that it's not happening, and then beg your constituents for a mill levy so you can replace that piece of equipment or pieces of equipment, or you can plan ahead. You can start educating the public, and you could start doing a gradual one. And the whole idea of loss control, you might say, Kyle, that doesn't sound like loss control to me, but it really is, because if you plan ahead and you know where your exposure is and you know how to correct that exposure and you're taking steps to mitigate the impact. You're taking the steps to mitigate asking the public for more money, because nobody really wants to ever pay more money. But if you do it gradually, it's going to improve your chances. So next, this is the slide that I was quite excited about. This is by no means all-encompassing, but here are some of the top loss exposures that I see from going around to districts. And just to give you a number for that, I typically visit anywhere between, I would say, 100 to 130 districts a year, and I have numerous other conversations that are not in person. So some common loss exposures that I am seeing from special districts within the pool are: one, employee safety. And I'm going to discuss each one of these, and then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. Whenever I say employee safety, what is the consequence of not managing your loss exposure for employee safety? Well, of course, we have employee injury. And then we have financial. We briefly touched on financial in my last example, but what is your loss exposure to financial? Is it making sure you have enough money to buy the equipment that you need? Is it making sure that you have enough money to cover any catastrophe that might happen? And another way that financial can be tied into that would be insurance coverage. So going back to the rising cost of equipment. If you know you have a piece of equipment that you can't afford to replace, but you also have insurance, you can make sure that that piece of equipment is properly insured, so you don't have to go pay for that new piece of equipment if something were to happen to the old one. You are covering your loss exposure by making sure that everything is properly insured. Next is public image. Another thing I want to say as I go through each of these, think about it as I'm giving the examples, or even just privately to yourself. How are these intertwined? So public image is a huge one. If you are constantly having employee injuries and your old employees who have now been irreversibly injured for the rest of their life, they're not going to have good things to say about the district, and that's not going to look great. Or if, let's say, you're a water and sanitation district, and you have a loss exposure for a sewer backup, and you've known about this for 10 years, but never done anything about it, and it comes out when you do have a serious backup event, how does that make the district look? And a poor public image can also lead to poor financials, because if they don't trust what you're doing, it's going to be hard for them to give you the price increases that you may need. Next is mental health. Mental health is a big one that we're covering, because we do work with a lot of districts, and they have high-stress jobs, high-risk jobs. And that kind of goes back to employee safety, but we want to make sure that we are creating a workplace or these things in place with an employee assistant program so that we can help their mental health, and we're providing a place that's not giving them more stress but also helping them out. And I want to take this a little bit further and go in line with your constituents. Let's say you were a library district or a public health district. Typically, whenever people go there, they see those places as a safe place. It's a place where they can express themselves freely, where they can go do the things that they want to do without being judged. And is your district providing that culture to where they can feel that they can do whatever they want to there, within certain limits, of course. Next is cyber. Cyber is a big one. Cyber seems like is the crime of the 21st century. And moving a little bit further on with that, cyber is a huge exposure. And it's one of those exposures that I'm going to use in quite a few examples today, because whenever I think of cyber, I don't only think of what are my exposures today. You have to be thinking a little bit further down the road, as our bad actors, as they begin to get more sophisticated, as they start trying other things. We have to make sure that our loss control is also getting more sophisticated. So we have to be able to look down the road and properly prepare. Property. We already discussed this a little bit in our public image and financial. Is everything properly insured? Is our buildings where we're having the public go into, is it a safe walking condition? Is the structure in good condition? So we have to go through and look and see where we have those potentials for exposure with our property. And another big piece of property exposure is vehicles. vehicles can be tied into two different things. Of course, employee safety. If you have an employee behind a district vehicle and something happens and they lose control and they crash the vehicle, that's an employee injury and that's a property issue. And now, think about this a little further, that also ties into be a financial loss. And it also goes a little bit further, depending on how bad the incident was and what happened, it could also be a public image issue. So those are 7 things that I see, and I just want to reiterate that by no means is that all-encompassing. These are just what I see a lot of. Another thing I want to say is loss control, I think very much like risk management, can be a very daunting task. But I want to encourage you all to think that loss control is something that you're already doing every day. If you think about it in its simplest terms, did you eat today? Do you plan to eat? That is you creating a loss control program to make sure that you're giving your body proper nutrients so you don't start to develop health issues due to lack of food, due to lack of water. So with that kind of thought process in mind, I challenge each of you to go ahead and type in the chat box. We're just going to stick with these 7. Out of the loss control exposures you see here, which ones do you think are the highest loss control exposure to your district? I'll give you all a few seconds, and I'll just throw out some other interesting facts and information about how you're using loss control in your day-to-day life. I also think of loss control whenever you drive to work. And do you have insurance on your vehicle as you're driving to work each day? If yes, then that's you implementing That's you implementing loss control into your personal life, because you see the potential for the loss of your personal vehicle, and you're taking steps to control that exposure by getting insurance, by making sure that everything is covered. That is interesting. I have 4 answers, and all 4 of them are cyber. And if I was allowed to type into this, I would say cyber too. I think very much for the reasons that I mentioned. It's one of those things that it's not like I want to say as special districts, but I want to take that further. I want to say as an entity, a public entity, as somebody who does business in the United States, cyber is not something that is going away. Cyber, like I said, is something that's getting worse. And we're going to use a couple examples of cyber coming up. So you guys helped guide our discussion further down the road, so I really appreciate all the feedback. And with that being said, we are going to move on to the next one. Actually, I missed one point, so my apologies. One thing I want to challenge you all to do as well is to think deeper. So whenever I think of that, I'm going to go back to employee safety, because that is a big thing that I do for the poll is employee safety. And I want you to not just think about the initial loss. So let's say we've already talked about slips, trips, and falls. We have an employee who slips, trips, and falls. They're out for work because they broke their leg. You've got your initial loss of that injury and paying for the medical treatment. Then you've got to think about your secondary, tertiary effects that may come from that. What does that do to employee morale? What does that do to your insurance costs down the road? What does that do to the rest of your workforce? Because now you either have to train somebody up as the injured employee is out, or you have to go a little bit deeper, and you have to have your current employees cover part of what their workload is. And next, I'd like to talk about the thing about loss exposures. Is one of the big things I'm going to encourage you to do here is, yes, think about losses yourself, but also rely on us at the CSD pool, because, again, that's what I'm here to do for you guys, is let me know what you think your losses are, because if I don't know what they are, I can't help you. And I will say, I like to think of myself as almost a subject matter expert in this realm, just because I work with all of you districts. We work with over 2,500 districts across the state, so I'm hearing all kinds of different exposures, and you guys might be in your bubble thinking that this exposure only applies to my district. Why is it only happening to me? And what do I do about this? But if you let us know, then we can help out a little more. And what this really encourages you to do is be proactive. I think that's one of the big goals of loss control. Because as I mentioned earlier, we want to protect our district. We want to fulfill that fiduciary responsibility. And how do we do that? By managing losses. We want to know how our employee is going to get injured, and then we want to see what can we do to make sure they don't get injured. We want to know what our biggest cyber threat is. Is it somebody sending a wrong email? Is it somebody clicking on a link to something? Or is it somebody looking at websites they shouldn't? And we want to know that, and we want to address it before it becomes an issue. Because the thing is, if you identify your losses, you know where you have the potential for losses within your district, half the battle is done. Now, all you need to do is think about what can we do to minimize that exposure. And going back to the being proactive rather than reactive, I'll give 2 examples for this. One, if you know that you have a slip, trip, and fall issue at your district, or no, let's go cyber. You guys give me a cyber question, answers. Let's say you know that you have a cyber exposure at your district, and you have 2 options knowing that you have an exposure. You can utilize some of the resources that the CSD pool offers. You can find some other resources, and you can help address that cyber gap. You can put plans, you can put policies in place to minimize your cyber exposure, or you can do nothing. And I want to ask, just because I see that I do have quite a few water and sanitation districts here, I am going to use you guys as an example. Let's say you have a cyber breach of your SCADA system, or you know you have the potential for that loss. And there's 2 ways this could go. One, you're going to be the proactive district. You know that you have that exposure. You went through cyber assessments. You really stepped up your cybersecurity, and you feel very comfortable. And you see one of your employees, they tell you, hey, I think that I have an email that doesn't look right. So they tell you about it, you guys delete it, you report it, everything goes just fine. Now let's pretend that you're the other district, and you know that you have a cyber exposure. You know that there's holes in your cybersecurity, and you choose to do nothing about it. A couple years rolls by, you get that same email that the first district gets, but your team member does not have cybersecurity, and now they've hacked your SCADA system, and your treatment plant is shut down for an undetermined amount of time until you can get this under control. Now, let's pretend that you're both districts, and we have to go talk to Channel 9 News or whatever your local news authority is. Do you want to be the district talking about how you saw the potential loss and you put plans in place and you were able to notice something coming and prevent the loss from happening? Or do you want to be the district on the news saying, I am so sorry to my constituents, we saw this as a potential hazard, we did nothing about it, and now you all don't have water and sanitation services for an undetermined amount of time, and we have to go through these steps to get our SCADA system back. And for you guys who are not in the water and sanitation world, a SCADA system is the operation system typically of the plant. All right. And one thing I want to say, going back to identifying, or going back to the we're experts. So again, I know what typical exposures are to districts, and I can talk to different districts. So if you have an exposure that you're not sure about and you don't know of any other districts in your world that do, reach out to me. Let me know. I can chat with other districts and see what it is. That's something that I really pride myself on doing. As Alex mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I have a wide realm of safety and risk background, but where I really think I can help you is creating this community of, yes, we see we have an issue, and we're going to talk about it. Because the one thing I'll say, this is kind of going back to the being proactive rather than reactive, is there is no shame in admitting that you have a loss exposure. There's no shame in admitting that you have an exposure to a loss that you don't know how to address. I will say there is shame in knowing that you do have those exposures and doing nothing about it. Asking for help is never a problem, but just hoping that nothing happens and being caught completely off guard when something does happen is unacceptable, because you know what the loss could potentially do to your district, and if you don't know, you should talk to somebody about it. Moving forward, we're going to talk about how do you see your exposures? How do you assess them? How do you find out what risk exposures your district is actually exposed to? There's a number of different ways to do this, but tying it back into risk management, we're going to want to perform a risk assessment. And the way that I like to say this is, again, a risk assessment can be a very, very daunting task to do because I could look around the office that I'm sitting in right now and identify 100 different risks without stepping out of my chair. So what I typically suggest districts do is you have a couple options. One, get a group of people inside a room. I like to call it a roundtable discussion. You could always invite me if you like. And you have that conversation of what do we think the 5 largest risks are to the district. I know that's a very broad topic, but once you get some kind of consensus from the group, you start narrowing that down. Or another option is once you get your group together to figure out your potential risk of loss exposure, you pick one of those 7 topics that I started with. Do we want to start with employee injury? Do we want to start with cyber? Do we want to start with vehicle exposure? And once you have all of those down, then you can start diving a little bit deeper in with the assessment. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide, and we're also going to use another cyber example. Another thing, too, is look at your past claims. This is something that I think is really valuable, and we're going to cover this toward the end with some of the options that the CSC pool offers to control exposures. But what are your past claims, especially for employee injury, for cyber losses, for property losses? Look at your previous claims and say, okay, do we have any trends? Do we have people who were constantly lifting something too heavy and causing a back injury? So you can do that as a way to look and see what are your past claims. Another way is look at what exposures do others have. So once you've figured out, we'll stick with the employee injury realm here for a second. What are your past exposures? Ask other districts, because that's one thing I really love about the special district world is you guys are all very intertwined. You all communicate well with each other. Ask a colleague. Ask a district that does something similar to you or a district that does something completely different, and ask them what are their exposures. Because just because you do similar work, it doesn't mean that you're going to have the same exposures or that you've had the same past losses. But learning from other districts is a great way for you to look down the road and see, well, we haven't had this loss now, but another district that does work very similar to us has. So we're going to be proactive and go ahead and implement a safety program to reduce that risk. And I like to give this example is ask your team and back to ask your peers, ask your board members, but don't limit them. Don't say what has happened to you while you were at the district. Ask them what's happened to you in previous roles. What's happened to you or other colleagues or people that you know from past personal life experiences. I like to give this example just because I think it gives everybody a laugh, but it is extremely true, and it just kind of shows how things go. So my dad called me probably about 2 years ago, and he's like, son, my phone doesn't work. I'm like, well, why doesn't it work? And he said, well, I was watching videos on YouTube, and I had this pop-up come, and it said, do you want a free Walmart gift card? And he said, boy, do I ever. So he clicked on it, and basically they completely hacked and fried his phone, and he had to get a new one. And the reason why I'm telling this story is because, yes, it's very lighthearted, but for somebody who maybe doesn't know about all the different pop-up scams, that could be a learning moment. And you could take that knowledge and teach, the rest of your team about that potential exposure. So even if it doesn't seem like it's directly going to apply to you, there are a lot of things with past losses that you can use as a learning moment for your team. All right, moving forward is the risk assessment matrix. So once we've identified our potential risk, we're going to want to take each of those and we're going to want to rate them with this risk assessment. And the way the risk matrix works that you are seeing on your screen right now is it ranks our risk in a severity versus frequency, where A 1 would be a marginal severity. That means, let's go back to the employee injury. You have an employee who trips over a cord, but they catch their balance and nothing happens. Whereas if you think of a 4 on the severity realm, let's say we have an employee who falls off a catwalk and they fall 15 feet and they have broken bones and they're going to be off work and probably permanently disabled from the injury. Next, we have the other column, and it talks about frequency. So improbable would be something that, yes, it is possible for it to happen, but the chances of it are not very likely at all. I would think of that as something along the lines of, maybe this happens once during my career, or maybe it happens once during the span of 3 people's careers. Something that you don't really think about. Whereas you think of the frequency of a 5, that would mean that that event is going to happen within the next week, within the next 2 weeks. It's something that's almost imminent. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So what you do is you multiply those for each risk, and you pick your severity, you pick your frequency, and you multiply them together, and you get those numbers in the middle. And that's where we're going to rank it from a low risk, a medium risk, a serious risk, or a high risk. And the whole idea behind this is, going back to the note that I made earlier, as there are tons of risk out there. And we can literally sit in our desk and we can pick out hundreds. What this risk matrix helps you do is it helps you think, well, do I really want to be spending my time addressing those low-level risks, or do I want to focus my team's efforts on those high and serious? And another goal of this is, once you get that number, let's say you have something that is a 20. Your whole goal with loss control and to protect your districts to reduce losses is we want to take that risk and we want to take that loss exposure and we want to turn it from a 20 to, let's say, a 6 or a 9. Either way, no matter what it's looking like, we want to be making progress in lowering that chance of risk. So with that in mind, we're going to use cyber for this little activity here. And with that in mind, I just want to say, what are the chances of our district encountering a cyber attack? Let's pretend that we're a district who today is the first day we've ever heard about cyber. I mentioned that gift card thing, and you guys are like, oh no, I would have wanted the gift card too. So taking that a step further, let's say that our frequency for a cyber issue is a 5, because we are getting tons of spam emails and our employees just can't seem to stop clicking on them. And nothing bad has happened yet, but it is coming. And let's also say that we have really sensitive cyber infrastructure, that if somebody does hack into us, they have control of everything and they can pretty much shut down the district until we get it figured out. I would call that a catastrophic or a critical, but we're going to just play the numbers high for the sake of this. So our cyber exposure is going to be a 5 on frequency and a 4 on catastrophic. So that means it has the highest risk rating it could. This means this is an imminent danger to the district. So what do we do once we've picked that out? We want to turn that 20 into a lower number. And we do that through loss prevention and mitigation. So that's where our control comes into. So the first step in loss control was, 1, understanding what our losses were, where they came from, and how to prioritize them. And once we have a list of our top loss exposures, we want to take that and apply prevention and mitigation. We want to take that 20 risk factor of our cyber attack and we want to take it down. So what do you do once you know what the risk is? We need to figure out how we lower those numbers. And what do you do if you don't know how to move forward? And this goes back to the point I made, and it's another one of those key points to this presentation that I really want to drive home to you all, is never be afraid to ask for help. Never be afraid to ask for guidance, because while cyber might be very new to you, you might be able to talk to a district that has a very robust cyber plan. You might be able to talk to a district that's also had a catastrophic cyber loss. And from talking to those people and from learning from them, you are going to be able to move forward and develop that plan. So, once you have that, and it doesn't have to be outside the district too. I could also say, as districts, depending on your number of employee size, is you have a wealth of resources already at your disposal within the district. Ask your board members, see if they have any opinions. Ask other district employees. Maybe they've seen something in the past too, or sometimes people just surprise you. Maybe they have a cyber background. But never be afraid to ask for help, because it's one of those things to where if they don't know, and that's going to come into play a little bit further as well too. And next, invite others to your solution. Maybe you have another roundtable brainstorming event where you get people from your district, you get people from other districts who have experience, or even me and other members of the CSD pool, have them come on site and have them help brainstorm that mitigation plan. And our whole goal there is we want to take that 20 and we want to put it down to a manageable number. Because I will say, as you're doing these risk assessments, there are some risks that you completely eliminate. Let's say you're a district that does a lot of confined space entries, and you have a high risk there just due to exposures, due to maybe newer employees, whatever it may be. And a risk like that is interesting because you can take that risk of 16 and you can turn it to a 0 if you decide to contract it out, because then none of your employees are exposed to that risk. But things like cyber, I don't think you can ever completely do away with that risk, but what we can do is we can take it down. So let's say you've talked to me. You've talked to other districts with similar cyber setups as you, and you've talked to a couple of your employees that had good feedback, and you come up with a mitigation plan. What is your mitigation plan? Well, we have this 20-level risk, and we think by implementing cyber training to our employees, we can take this frequency of a 5 because they don't know anything to look out for, and we can take it down to a 2. Because now that they've had the cyber training, they know what fake emails look like. They know to double check and verify information before they start sending things. So we were able to take the frequency down to a 2. And we've also partnered with a cyber firm that's going to put certain roadblocks for those bad actors in place. So now our severity has also went from a catastrophic 4 to a moderate 2. So by implementing those two things, our employee training and our severity, we were able to take this 20 high loss and bring it down to a 4. Now that is the entire goal of loss control, is mitigating those exposures and making them manageable. Now again, we did not completely eliminate the risk of cyber, but we took steps to protect the district. And thinking back to talking to our public, isn't that a conversation that you all would rather have with your constituents of, this is where our risk was, this is what we used your tax money to do to bring the risk down to here, so now we are protecting this vital resource that you guys rely upon daily? I think that that's a great conversation, and that's something that you can brag about. We want to have something where we're bragging and we're saying that, yes, we are utilizing district funds to the best of our ability to protect you. And last thing, before I dive into the CSD Pool Loss Control Solutions, is this is just another thing to think about as you're developing solutions, is we don't want to create a larger hazard or another hazard with our solution. One example I'll give to this, let's say that your district has an unacceptable trending record of muscle strains, muscle pulls, back injuries from lifting. So what's a solution that you can come up with? Well, let's just say, for sake of argument, let's say that you have employees who are lifting 100-pound boxes 20 times a day. And your solution to solve that is to provide them with a forklift. And a forklift is pretty much going to eliminate that lifting severity, but now you have to think about, what hazards does bringing a forklift into my district bring? Does it bring a piece of equipment? Now we have to make sure employees are trained, and it just brings a whole other level. I'm not saying it's a bad solution, but then you'll have to do another risk assessment of the forklift operation to make sure it's bringing a lower risk than lifting the boxes was. And to take that just a little bit further, maybe you can come up with a solution where you eliminate the forklift too. Instead of having those 100-pound boxes, maybe you decide to split them into 25-pound boxes, and you implement a two-person lifting team. And that's another way to reduce the risk. Now that we've really covered why we want to be looking out for our loss exposures, and we want to talk about what our losses are and how to rate them and what we do to solve them, I want to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about resources that we offer at the CSD pool to help you control your losses. Now, there are a number of things that we do, and I'm constantly looking to expand this. So that's another thing I would like to challenge you all with is, if you would like to see a loss control resource offered by the pool, reach out and let me know after this. But one of the top things is a risk assessment. We've already covered what a risk assessment is. I do this for tons of districts, and I'm always looking for ways to improve it and make it more accessible to you. Because just as I said, getting into these processes to begin with can be a little daunting. But having somebody like myself come in and help guide you through that process, because that's something I always say I'll do, and it's true. I will go to your district if you say you want to conduct a risk assessment, and I'll sit there with your team, and we can go start to finish. What do we think the risks are? We can run everything through that risk matrix, and then we can even pinpoint your top 5, your top 10 risks based on our discussion, and we can start brainstorming some of those solutions. And the nice thing about that too is as you're coming up with those and we all get stumped, we're like, well, I'm not really sure what to do. We can take that a step further and we can invite other districts to join. Or if you guys want to remain anonymous, I can just ask other districts if they've had anything similar. So, of course, conducting those risk assessments, I'm always happy to do that. Next is trending data. One of the key points I brought up when we talked about identifying our potential loss exposures was, where are your lost exposures coming from? And being pool members, I have access to your guys' loss records as long as you've been a member of the pool. So I can give you trending data. And what trending data means, it means I can pull up a graph and I can give you a list and it says, out of the last 10 years, our number one injury was from falling off a ladder. And I can bring that data to you so you can look at it and discuss it with your team as you're implementing this loss control program. Is we have a ladder issue. Do we remove ladders? Do we use aerial lifts? Do we implement ladder safety training? And then you can start to develop those mitigation plans. Another thing I really like about trending data, I know a lot of the districts that we work with, they can be small. You guys could have 4 or less employees. And when you have 4 or less employees, of course, knock on wood, you're going to show less injuries. And sometimes that's hard to get trending data for. But what I can do is I can pull data from all of your entity types. So let's say you're a water and sanitation district. I can pull the top cause of loss for all water and sanitation districts, and I can say as a whole, water and sanitation districts have an issue with slips, trips, and falls, so you can know that maybe that's where you start off at. And that's also another good way to be proactive is looking and seeing what your peers are experiencing injuries from. And I will say, whenever I'm pulling the entire reports, I don't show names, I don't show district names. It's just out of all water and sanitation, here are the top 5 causes of loss. So everybody's information stays private. Next, I want to talk about different safety programs. We can help you develop safety programs, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in the next slide. But one of the key things for safety programs is I think one of our biggest losses we are exposed to, and maybe I'm a little biased from my background, but it's our employee safety, because the whole key to your fiduciary responsibility is to protect your district's assets. And as a district, your number one asset should always be your team. It should always be your employees. So how do we protect our employees? We show them what expectations are set, and we train them in those expectations. And I'm just kind of scratching the surface here, but we want to offer them those different safety programs. And last thing for this slide, I want to let you guys all know is another thing that kind of ties in with the trending data is I also offer free incident investigations. So if you had an injury and you want to know why it happened, because that's another key part of loss control. Yes, we want to be as proactive as possible, but we also want to take our losses and make them learning moments. So when you have a loss at your district, whether it be a property loss, whether it be a cyber loss, whether it be an employee injury or a vehicle, you should always be sitting down and asking yourself 3 questions. 1, what happened? 2, why did it happen? And your final question should always be, what can we do as a district to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And that's something that I'm more than happy to come on site and actually help you guys walk through. And I will say too, it does not have to be an injury. It could be, wow, we had a really severe near miss. Nothing happened, but there was the potential for a significant loss. What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? And the nice thing about that too is, just like with the trending data, I can take that information and I can share it with other districts, or you can share it with other districts, because that's one of the reasons why I really love the safety world and I got into this, is because none of it's proprietary information. Our whole goal with safety is to make sure our team goes home. So nobody's ever afraid to share information. Of course, I'm not going to say this district had this injury, but what we're going to do is I'm going to say this happened. You guys have a potential for this to happen, and here's some possible steps that you could take to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. Oh, there we go. And some other ways we can help. This is going into our safety programs. I am a big fan of having safety manuals, but I want to take that a little bit further for you guys. Is we have safety manual templates that we can give each of your districts. So this can go into 2 different realms. 1, if you don't have a safety manual at all, I can give you the template and we can work through it together, because I am very proud of this fact, even though it might seem a little aggravating at first, but let me tell you, all my safety manuals are about 70% built. It's going to have your best practices. It's going to have the thou shall and thou shalts. That's a joke, just saying that they come from OSHA regulations. But the key part about the other 30%, that means that I'm going to come to your district, or we're going to plan a virtual meeting, and we're going to go through each section of that safety manual, and I'm going to say, well, here's the policies. How does this apply for you? And that last 30% is site-specific information. Because the whole goal for your safety manual should be that any employee in your district should be able to look up some kind of safety policy that they're about to do, and they should be able to know what's expected of them. And I'm also a big fan the way this is designed. I have it set on a rotating schedule, because it's one of my biggest pet peeves is to have a safety manual that somebody works for 3 months to complete, and then it sits on a shelf for 5 years until it's somebody else's job to update it for 3 months again. We want it to be a living, breathing document, and that's what I'm going to teach your team to do. Next is safety audits. So one thing with loss control too is getting a second set of eyes out there, and I really love doing safety audits. As Alex mentioned, I was a corporate safety auditor before this. I would travel the country from Maine to California each year doing safety audits. So I come and I do no consequence safety audits for your districts. And I always have to give the caveat, it's no consequence unless I find something that's putting someone in imminent danger, then we might have to do it. But the whole goal of the safety audit is I'm going to sit down with you, walk through your district, and I'll point out things. And I'll say, you could be doing this better, and it's going to minimize losses because A. You could be doing this better, you can do this because I've seen another district do it. And I like to say too, whenever I come out to a site to actually help you guys with these things, I pride myself in, I don't like being a risk professional that says you should do this because my book says so. I like to dive in and I like to learn the processes. Whenever I give you a suggestion, it's because I'd like to think that I took time to develop an understanding and I have a general idea of why this would work better for you compared to what you're doing now. And one of the best tools for loss control, in my opinion, is a safety committee. A high-functioning safety committee that sits around and talks, and they go over past losses. Maybe you task your safety committee with doing your loss control program, and you say, well, here are my top 5 causes of loss. Safety committee, come up with solutions. And if you don't currently have a safety committee, that's another one of the things I do that I really love to help districts out with, is I can come out to your district and I can help you build a safety committee from the ground up. With that being said, I will help you show who you should choose from your district. I can help you develop a topic, because that's another nice thing about safety committees is, yes, there are best practices, but I go to some safety committees and they task themselves with employee manuals, employee policies, while other safety committees, they review injuries. And other safety committees, they'll give themselves an incentive, like, we want to start an employee health program, and that's what they do. And depending on what your risks are to your district, you can really mold and develop your safety committee to meet those goals. And we've got training. Training is one of the other cornerstones to loss control, in my opinion, because we can identify risk all day, especially in that employee injury realm, and we can talk about risk all day. But unless we're actually implementing that prevention and mitigation, all of our risk and loss control assessments are for nothing. So with that in mind, I want to throw out some CSD pool trainings here, because the way I look at it, if you have a loss exposure that's a problem, and you're not telling your team about it, and you're not teaching them how to mitigate it, it's never going to get better, because they simply don't know what they don't know. So for vehicle and employee injury, we have the skid truck. If you guys are not familiar with the skid truck, get on our website or give me an email and I'll have a quick chat with you about it. It is a way to teach our members how to counter steer out of severe driving conditions like hydroplaning and skidding on ice. And we've partnered with a great driver who is literally in the passenger seat in a controlled environment, teaching your guys how to counter steer out of that in a hands-on way. Next is in-person training. Another thing I do is for completely free. I come onto your location and I offer your core safety trainings, your confined space, your fall protection. I do ergonomics training. So really anything that you can think of in that safety realm, ask me about it, because our general rule is if you need a training that we don't provide, ask it and we'll develop it. And lastly is Vector Solutions. I know a lot of you districts use Vector Solutions, and I'm a huge fan of it because it also allows for a lot of those safety trainings. It's thinking deeper into loss control realm. It offers human resources trainings like discrimination. So extremely important stuff to have, because I don't have a human resources background, but we can offer that through Vector Solutions. And also, some of those trainings can be used for our property and liability folks to help save you a little bit of money. So now we're controlling losses on the financial side. But really, the key takeaway with training, folks, is teach your employees, because a trained employee is an empowered employee, and an empowered employee is going to make good decisions. And that's all I've got to wrap up, but just remember, we all have losses, and the key takeaway I really want you all to just think about today is, look when you walk through the district, talk to your employees, and think about what are our main exposures to loss in our district, or even look at past injuries, and then think, one, are we doing anything about it? If the answer is no, maybe we give Kyle a call to start doing something about it. Two, are we, based on what we're doing about it, what can we do to take it to the next level? And then three, are we communicating this with other districts? One, so they can help us, and two, maybe you help them out. So with that, I'll turn it back over to questions. So if anybody has any questions, I think Alex facilitates that. Don't you, Alex?
Yeah, I can do that. Thanks, Kyle. Anybody that has any questions, we'll take them now in the chat box. We got Kyle here for 6 more minutes, and he's happy to answer anything that's outstanding that he might have touched on today. While we're waiting, if any questions do come through, we're going to be hosting another webinar next month, kind of continuing this conversation that we're having about loss control and the broader picture of risk management. If you'd like to sign up for that, we're going to be focusing on building your safety committees. And so that works for members that have safety committees already and they're looking to take that to the next level, or members that don't have a safety committee and want to learn more about it. We talked a little bit about safety committees today and how that is one component of loss control. And so we're going to take some time next month in December to flesh out exactly how safety committees can grow and how you can build them out. Right. I'm not seeing any questions coming through or any typing, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up a few minutes early. Kyle, do you have anything else you wanted to leave us with today or anything?
Just with thank you all for joining, and never hesitate to utilize us. I'm always happy to talk to our members.
Sounds good. Yeah, and again, just want to remind everybody too that Kyle's services are part of your membership benefits. So any trainings that we offer, or if you just wanted to come out and take a look at your organization, your district, call him, send him an email at safety@csdpool.org and get something scheduled on the calendar for 2025. So with that, we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks everybody for being here, and hopefully we see you again next month.